once the two of them are through with their formal comments, we are going to have, as we always do, a lively Q&A period. So let me, a believer in long introduction, so I'm not going to go on and on about John and Daniel, but they both have backgrounds in environmental issues, and I'm sure they'll tell us more both about what the Public Service Commission does and what they have done so far on environmental issues that, of course, will help them be effective public service commissioners. John, go ahead. The floor is yours.
I see Dee had her hand up.
Dee, go ahead.
Are we going to use the chat? I mean, I can read the chat for questions. I don't know how you want to do it, but it's kind of hard for everybody to hit their mic. So
yes, thank you, Dee. Yes, hit the chat while John and Daniel are talking, and you can write out your questions, and we'll let Dee kind of manage the asking of the questions to the candidates when we get to the Q&A period. So John, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Bill, and let me say first just how much affinity I have for Raven County and for many people in this call. I finally remember Patricia and Warren putting me up when I was there for your fabulous, it felt like one of the last events, even though it was last year, it feels like one of the last of the social events and that I got a chance to attend. I'm a farm-raised environmentalist. I've spoken to your group before. I think everybody knows that I've been in my business of energy efficiency, which I've walked away from now. I've got a very good set of women who are running this company, and to my chagrin, are doing a better job than I was doing. So it's always nice to be able to walk away from a business that other people run it better than you. And sometimes in business, that's the way to figure it out. Let somebody else do it better. And I am back at a Public Service Commission race that I tried 2 years ago. I now live in Augusta, and I am motivated by both the climate aspects of what the Public Service Commission can do, and also the real world aspects of what it can do. We know that our electric rates for those in Georgia Power Service territory are too high. We know that the fees, just by virtue of some recent legislation that passed through the PSC, are too high. I had the occasion in January to speak to the PSC on the subject, and a lady from Savannah was speaking. Said, I don't believe I can afford my bills and these rate increases. And I really am concerned. In the audience that day was the Georgia Power president, Paul Bowers. And I pointed at Mr. Bowers and I said, I think it's important for everyone here to realize that Mr. Bowers makes $13,000 per day. And this lady from Savannah who drove up here is telling us she's going to have a hard time paying her bill because of these fee and rate increases that are going up. And I think for Democrats, I think it just helps to that audience, frankly, the Republican Commission, and frankly, most of the audience in there needed to hear that, because a lot of them were corporate interests, Republican folks, not necessarily bad people. They just are disconnected from the rest of Georgia. And so I see my job as someone who's been in business now for 20 years in the energy efficiency space and in the energy space, someone who has solar on just about everything I've got, drives an electric car, is the green guy, literally the green guy. New Energy Guy is my Twitter handle. I see an opportunity to essentially embed myself on the commission and help change the energy policy, the price, the choices. Daniel and I have great admiration for Daniel. He and I were on a call earlier today with concerned black clergy. My point there was, hey, we've got 3% of all Georgia Power contracts going to minority firms. I mean, as Democrats, it's like, what? That stuff is whacked out. So we need a strong business spokesperson on the PSC who can build alliances with Republicans until we take the commission over, and I believe we can eventually. but who also understands energy, has been in that space for a long time, and then an environmentalist, a tree hugger out there to really carry the torch for climate change and for closing coal plants and moving to green energy. So I don't want to monopolize the time. I want to be deferential to my friend Daniel Blackman, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak. I love Raven County, and I look forward to coming back and having a little moonshine at the distillery up there.
All right, thank you, John. Daniel, the floor is yours.
Well, first and foremost, I want to say how much I appreciate and thank Raven County, one of folks that I've built long-term relationships with, and people that, let's be honest, until I began to come to that part of the state, I would say that even myself neglected the areas outside the Metro Atlanta region. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Daniel Blackman. I'm from Columbus, Georgia. My father was a United States Army Ranger. I heard the gentleman from Lumpkin on. My father was Special Forces, so he would train in the Lumpkin-Cleveland area. And so for me, this race is about what we're going to be able to do for the entirety of Georgia. As John mentioned, we have a 5-member Public Service Commission. That commission consists of 5 Republicans, and a Democrat has not been in that seat since David Burgess was in that seat. And the challenges that we're facing today is not an issue of, which one of us would be better. The reality of it right now, that I can honestly say on this call, is who is going to be able to drive us into a clean energy future that includes North Georgia, coastal Georgia, rural Georgia, middle Georgia, I mean, you name it. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm tired of being left out of the conversation across the board, not just from an energy and environmental space, but this part of Georgia, Raven County, which I love, and I've spent several 4th of July weekends and hung out with the family, it's more than just coming up there and your well-being. The Public Service Commission regulates our utilities. For senior citizens on a fixed income that have to determine between their light bill and their medication, we've got to be fair to making our decisions. For young men, women, and college students and individuals, small businesses around the state that need access to high-speed internet and wireless broadband, whether they're in the mountains of North Georgia or they're in the coastal areas of South Georgia, or they're, quite frankly, in rural Georgia, they don't have the access. Too many kids that drop Chick-fil-A's and Burger Kings and McDonald's for the internet because they don't have access at home. So the Public Service Commission isn't just about the way in which we deploy energy and we invest into renewables like my friend John would agree. It's really about pushing us toward the future, and fossil fuel energy is not going to get us there. Too much of our water systems have been contaminated by coal ash, I apologize, and too many of our areas, specifically in poor communities and primarily in communities of color, we're seeing asthma rates 3 and 4 times the national rate. There's a direct impact on emissions and the type of energy we're using. I look forward to the conversation. I'm so thankful for us to be together virtually. I prefer to be in Raven, but I look forward to the questions and the conversations. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Dee, you've been looking at the chat room questions. So let me just give you the floor to, no, you're not ready. Okay, she's shaking her head, she's not ready. Well, I'm always ready with questions. I'm well trained at asking questions. So let me ask both of you, and we can go John first and Daniel a second on this and responding. In terms of Raven County, because I know you're both very familiar with our home area, what would you see as being your priorities in terms of serving the interests of the folks in Raven County on the Public Service Commission? John, go ahead. John, unmute yourself.
Yes, my desire to not be disruptive ended up being disruptive. Let's be clear. There are a lot of places in Georgia that don't have Georgia Power Service. A lot of rural places that don't have Georgia Power Service, and so These are not necessarily Raven County. They're not necessarily other areas, but there are places around Georgia that don't. But we all breathe the same air that Georgia Power and its coal plants pollute. And so we have, we're a little under a third now of our energy consumption in Georgia is from coal power. And I have some fancy air filter I brought back from China where they actually have to monitor their air quality really closely. And I was stunned to see in Augusta how high the particulate matter is from coal plants. And you can watch at nighttime this particulate matter increasing. You're not immune to this in North Georgia. So I think as we're able to, it's a macro thing, but I'm going to talk about it. Transitioning away from dirty fuels and toward green energy will have an improvement in the air quality. And even though it's beautiful in Rayburn, your air quality isn't necessarily beautiful all the time. And those are byproducts, not just of Georgia Power, but of TVA, of coal plants. And so a long-term, hopefully a short-term, movement away from that would be helpful. Insofar as directly and bills and things like that, I just think we can be much more Spartan about the energy costs. Power gets to make essentially 11 cents on every dollar we spend. You spend $100, they're making $11 for themselves, for their bonuses, and for the corporate buddies in Wall Street. So our EMCs and our city utilities don't have that profit motivation. And so there's some argument that that's a better way to go, a nonprofit way to go. So, but we have a monopoly. We have to regulate that monopoly. That's what the Public Service Commission does. And I think watching those costs, whether it be expensive plants like Vogel, whether it be other capital improvements, a lot of storm damage stuff that Georgia Power does, they put into the rate base. That means you pay for it like an annuity to them over decades. We need to be looking at those sort of things. So I think there's ways to reduce our costs. And for many of us on the call, it may not be a big burden. But for those that it is a big burden, it's a big burden. And we need to be reducing those costs and doing it in a green manner.
Thank you, John. Daniel?
So what I would say to that answer is conservation is near and dear to my heart. When you look at North Georgia, I live in Forsyth County. We are at the doorstep of North Georgia. You come through Forsyth County, you go north, and from everything to the Appalachian Trail to Amicalola Falls, I mean, we have a beautiful part of our state. And what I would like to see is for more of that part of the state to be protected. John, it's really hard to debate a lot of times with folks that think alike. And, one thing that John and I we jokingly say we probably have one of the friendliest primaries that Georgia's seen in a long time. But the reality of it is I want to do two things as it relates to Raven in that part of the state. Number one, I want all of you all to know that this is District 4. District 4 is the entirety, pretty much of North Georgia. I believe there are 27 counties that make up the 4th district. So for me, it's going to be critical first and foremost for us to start off by addressing the issues of workforce development. I think we need to make sure that we look at that part of the state and we make up in our minds that that part of the state is going to be included in the conversation. I want to make sure that folks that leave Raven and folks that have access to background environmental issues and sustainability have a seat at the table. Under the leadership of Governor Sonny Perdue, there was something called the Consumer Utility Council that was established at the Public Service Commission that was essentially it was a watchdog for ratepayers and for utility payers. The challenge is we defunded that way back in 2008. Not only was it defunded, but federal grants for not only the Savannah Riverside, but for water testing around the state of Georgia, the federal grant program was cut for that. I believe Savannah River by itself received about $8.5 million just to test the water. We need to start thinking proactively about the decisions we make and the impact it has around the state. So I want to make sure, one, we have regional meetings on a consistent basis. I mean, I wish I could just be in a room and ask all of you to raise your hand if you've seen a public service commissioner in that part of the state. The reality is they're not having town halls. They're not having community meetings. And if you see them where they show up, their names on the ballot. And these are 6-year terms. There's no reason why any of us shouldn't see or be engaged with our public service commissioners. So I want to break up the state into regions, 159 counties. Why don't we have a north, south, east, and west region where we have what I'd like to present as a utility ratepayer school, where we sit and we listen, not assume we know what Raven wants, but listen, understand, and build an infrastructure as a pipeline between counties like Raven and the Public Service Commission that sits in the city of Atlanta.
And if I may, let me tag along his idea, Bill, and I'll only be a second. You can ask the next question. In that workforce development that Daniel made a good point on, that is going on, or they're trying to bring that right now in Rayburn. As y'all know, I often charge up at the Fromage fabulous deli there in town, and that owner's name escapes me. But one of the things he did, a couple of years ago was gave me a flyer on the redevelopment that you're trying to bring back to that old, whatever it was, the fabric, the textile plant. Yeah. And so the idea would be that we could work as PSC commissioners to actively go in and say, look, we want to put solar on that thing. We want to figure out how we can bring you just lots of water power, wind power, whatever it is. Let's be innovative. Let's bring the apparatus of the state to bear. And we're talking about a statewide office. There's 5 constitutional offices. 2 are up. We got a good candidate in Savannah, both these seats. So Democrats can and activists, Daniel or myself, can make good progress on things like workforce development and thinking outside the box instead of these knuckleheads in Atlanta that sit behind their desk right now.
Daniel, I'm going to call on you first to address this question. Ed and Laura Hart asked, we moved here from South Carolina 2 years ago where the state lost a ton of money when the construction of a new nuclear plant was abandoned. What is your position on nuclear power and whether the state of Georgia should be involved in funding or promoting it?
Well, first and foremost, let's be very clear. In 2009, Democrats and Republicans voted on the construction of Vogtle 3 and 4. To be very clear, I was part of the coalition with a gentleman named Reverend Woodbury, which sued and worked with the Attorney General in South Carolina to actually bankrupt that project, and they pulled out. It became a financial burden. One of the things we need to understand, Southern Company not only owns Georgia Power, they own Mississippi Power, they own Alabama Power. This is a company that owns, has a stake in different power utility companies around the South, okay? Here's what I want you to understand. In the state of Mississippi, Mississippi built these new coal-fired plants. But here's the thing. They didn't put any of those cost overruns on the ratepayer. I don't know what the Mississippi legislature did, but it was the right thing. I don't know if it comprised of Democrats or Republicans, but they made it where that construction was not on the backs of ratepayers, but the shareholders and utility companies had a much greater stake. That's not the case in Georgia. In Georgia, we have something called construction work in progress, or QUIP. That construction work in progress means that ratepayers, not shareholders, not Mr. Bowers, who again, as you heard earlier, makes $13,000 a day. Ratepayers are on the hook for that. I totally disagree with Plant Vogtle, which was supposed to be about a $12 to $14 billion project that now is a $27 billion project. It was supposed to be online 3 years ago. We're now over budget, behind schedule. And guess what? I met with the CFO of Georgia Power with a group of religious organizations back in October of last year. And out of his mouth, not mine, was that we would be paying for this. We, meaning you and I, for the next 60 years. So one, I do not agree with Vogtle, but my plan is right now is to work because the Public Service Commission term is 6 years. I want to work over a period of 3 to 4 years to begin to set the infrastructure up for us to be able to seriously transition. And in those last 2 years, begin to really drive that investment. We've already got a great solar industry here in Georgia. We've got to do more. But I'll be honest with you, for us to say right now we're going to go cold turkey and Vogtle, it just really wouldn't make sense because our money is already there. The Public Service Commission has already had hearings. The legislature could have done a lot more. And I'm sure all of us would agree we want to see more fighters there. But it's going to take a team effort between Democrats that are elected to the PSC and Democrats that are in the state House and the state Senate.
Daniel, let me follow up on that because I'm a novice in all this, and I want to make sure I understand you. You said something to the effect that $27 billion has already been spent on the Vogtle plant. Is that accurate? Is that what you said?
That's correct. It's somewhere between 26 and 27 billion that has already been approved. And I'm pretty sure the majority has been spent on that project.
Okay, so what you're saying is you're willing to just write that off as a loss and start?
Well, we can't, it's not even writing off as a loss. We can't recoup it. You know, the thing is, what we have to do is start thinking of policies that are either in place or that we can construct for ratepayers to try and recoup some of that. But the reality is, if you look at the last several legislative sessions, I personally know Democrats that have tried to write that in policy to reverse that notion. Be honest with you, just go back to 2019. From June until December, we worked to try and figure out how to not get the rates increased. Georgia Power will tell you, Southern Company will tell you that it had nothing to do with the cost overruns, but all of us know that not only the money that was lost, they put that on the back of ratepayers. And the challenge is right now, until we have legislation, which is not a role of the Public Service Commission, we need legislation in place that, one, protects consumers going forward, and two, can find a way to offer some relief. If not, the only other option is for us to try and sue the state, but we need the right attorney general in place to be able to go after Georgia Power to recoup some of those funds for ratepayers.
Thank you, Daniel. John? Unmute yourself. John, unmute.
I'm on. Okay, thank you. This is interesting, and this will mark one of the rare moments Daniel and I have a difference. But I do think in this particular instance, it's very important that we do. So he and I would have been in the exact same camp, 2 years ago, 4 years ago, 6 years ago, whenever this mess started. I said, pull the plug on Vogtle. This is a disaster. And he was right. I was right. We're right. We are now 85% complete. And I don't trust Georgia Power numbers, 84, 85, whatever we could be with the COVID delays and all this other stuff. We could be a good ways longer and many billions more. I don't dispute that. But unlike South Carolina, where they were really in the early stages of it, they'd spent a lot of money, but they were in the early stages. Pulling the plug would save all of this other pain. For us to pull the plug now would be a major mistake. I think we should complete Vogtle, suck it up, and to Daniel's point, we should hold Georgia Power accountable for every last cent that they spend between when this Democrat comes on the commission and the 6 years until my term will be over. And absolutely hold them accountable. But I'm sadly, I got to say, I think it's the best thing to do. I think it's the most economical thing to do. I think it protects the union jobs we want to protect, and it gets finished with the project. Now, the cold, hard reality of that, to Daniel's point earlier, the cold, hard reality of that, if we pull the plug right now, we're still going to be paying for that other stuff because of the seat whip and because of what the commission has already said. So we might as well get some benefit from it. The bad news for ratepayers is the minute they turn the switch and those reactors go online, we will see rates increase, not decrease. You know, the old adage that nuclear is it's too cheap to meter. That was back in the 70s. It was going to be too cheap to meter. Nuclear power is now the most expensive source of power because of the high capital costs. Solar and wind is the lowest. Lower capital costs and no fuel cost and no radioactivity. So I'm afraid we're stuck with it. It doesn't make me happy, but I believe that's the answer right now.
Thank you. Okay, Daniel, I'll start with you for the next question. This is from Dan and Mary Wilson. Representative Collins admitted in April that the federal funding he procured for broadband internet had not improved his service. What do our Republican friends on PSC say about this?
I mean, the proof is in the pudding. You don't have to ask what they say, just check their record. We haven't seen a significant investment since COVID-19. The governor literally, not the Public Service Commission, the governor just announced a partnership with AT&T to deploy 500 units that will have hotspots, these buses that are equipped through AT&T to offer wireless access throughout the state. Why weren't we doing this years ago? I mean, if you just think about it, right, let's just take the politics out of it. In the state of Florida, for the last 5-6 years, to my knowledge, Florida has been prepared with online learning because the majority of their schools are in direct paths of hurricanes. So Florida was ready to go online. They were ready to be able to operate their students when the power goes out. We have five public service commissioners for Republicans. We've always had Republicans that have been there that have always talked a good game, but the investment is not there. The support for it isn't there. I don't hear, when public service commissioners talk about wireless broadband, it's the forethought. It's not about saying it's no urgency to that conversation. So when I think of it, I'm really living in real time. Students and small businesses are struggling. Whether you go to the University of Georgia in Athens and you're home trying to get online learning, or you go to any one of our 159 counties where there's poor folks or low-income families, we just don't have the accessibility. So I think from the voting pattern that I've seen public service commission, they get an absolute F from me. And I don't say that as a Democrat and being Republican. Look at the voting record, look at the profile, and let's really think about what they're doing out now. I'll say this in closing. They have begun to shift that trend. But I think it's too little, too late in a time where we're already struggling and we don't have the right infrastructure in place, which means we're leaving communities and counties behind further and further every day.
Thank you, Daniel. John?
All right, I'm going to get on a roll here. I'm going to talk fast and cover a lot of ground. One, let's go back. Daniel talked about Mississippi. The interesting thing on Mississippi, because it just occurred to me, there are 3 public service commissioners. 2 of them are Democrats. That's why they held Georgia Power's, or rather the Southern Company's feet to the fire with Mississippi coal sequestration project. So I like the fact that Daniel mentioned that. It's just that the facts behind all that is that it was Democrats who actually made that happen. Back to broadband. Interesting. I served in the legislature. When I was a young guy and actually had a little more hair. This was, I think I got elected at 29 maybe. So a good long while ago. And I remember the Republicans were just starting to take over the House. And they would talk about how they stood up for rural Georgia. It was a bunch of baloney then, and it's a bunch of baloney now. Because what they do is they talk a big game, they build 4-lane highways out to all these rural places, and they don't build internet highways. And every year for the PSC has had a fund of about $25 million that's part of a landline, it's called the Universal Service Fund, and they get to allocate that money. And what they've done is they've allocated it to these small rural co-ops, fine, love it, who then run copper line telephones to rural, folks. They could have spent that money running high-speed voice over IP rather than copper line. So what this means is we have blown $250 million over just a decade. Now, when we could have been rolling out broadband, that's just what they had directly under their purview. If you talk to my Republican friends, and I've got, Tim Eccles has become a friend of mine on the PSC. It's one of the reasons I think I could be effective on the PSC. We flip a seat, we flip 2 seats, guy who's friendly-ish. We could make some deals. What Tim tells me is, hey, he said, well, we can't do anything. We can't do anything with broadband. And all the other ones said, we can't do anything with broadband. It's a bunch of baloney. If you got a PSC commissioner in there to coalesce all of these county groups together and city municipalities, everybody wants broadband. Everything's cheaper by the. I have federal money that's going to be coming aplenty. We need to have advocates who will stand up for rural Georgia and get that money. And some of it they already have. I'm telling you, folks, there's a lot of laziness and complacency at the PSC, and that has got to change. It would certainly under my tenure. I'm an activist with a capital A.
Daniel, go ahead.
Yeah, if I could just add something, let's be very clear. Follow the money. If you want to know what projects get done in Georgia and where our public service commissioners stand, follow the money. Because the gentleman that I'll be facing in November has taken over $23,000 to prosecute lobbies. And guess what? Those projects were approved. But the folks that are really struggling in areas that don't have access to wireless broadband, even though we see a tremendous amount of talk behind it. We're not seeing the investment because the wealth of people and of ratepayers around the state don't have the accessibility. They don't have blank checks to give to a public service commissioner. So I would say when you look at what has been done and completed, I want you to look at who wrote those checks and where their priorities are. They're definitely not for the people, they're props to utility companies.
Good point, Daniel.
Thank you, Daniel. And I'll let you start off with this, Daniel, because I suspect it's a follow-up in terms of your answer to your last comment. Janice Cochran asked, why doesn't Georgia Power or the state of Georgia give tax credits to homeowners who want to install solar panels?
Well, that's not entirely true. There are tax credits and incentives, but I will say first and foremost, they've done a poor job of, in all fairness to Georgia Power, so let me be clear, they have had incentives and programs that have been in place. One of the biggest things they have not done is worked on how that happens across the board. For example, let's just be very honest. If you want to put a solar system on your home, that's extremely expensive. The average Georgian cannot afford to put solar panels on their roof, and I wish in a perfect world we all could. But I think, one, the programs that have been made available have not been promoted, and we have not educated our communities enough what that transition looks like, especially for low and moderate income families. Most of those families don't have access to it. Many times, one of the big sort of barriers are access, meaning some folks are not qualified for the programs, and at the time with incentives, we're not seeing a huge push locally. And for instance, I'll give you an example. I have an EMC in Forsyth County, Georgia. Well, our EMC actually regularly holds meetings on how they're going to integrate community solar and different opportunities for folks that are living in that area to be able to plug into the grid. I think personally we've done a little better job, and from the incentivization process, I don't think we've done a good enough one, nor have we done a good one when a couple of years ago there were tax credits given for weatherizing your home. I mean, we're not doing a good enough job to broaden that conversation and have what I commonly refer to as energy equity. Needs to do a better job of making access to solar easier and make sure that not just homeowners, but renters are doing the things and putting things in place that will allow us to enjoy that. Last in California, I know this works because California did it under Mayor Eric Garcetti. He has a program where not only renters, but moderate income families can all have access to solar with public and private partnership, as well as opportunities to incentivize the businesses that are willing to go and do it. They get tax credits in return.
So,
Thank you, John.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So let me clarify one thing. There are currently no state incentives for solar. Only reason I know that is I happened to get the last bit of that 6 years ago, and I say that as it was expiring, I got a state tax credit. There's a federal tax credit that's still out there. It used to be at 30. This year it's 26. You can still take advantage of the federal, but there is no state. Having said that, the Georgia Power, or the Public Service Commission, the Georgia Power Commission, it might as well be called that. The Public Service Commission just passed on a 4-1 vote the ability to get net metering, which means that today, those that are Georgia Power customers, we pay roughly 10 or 11 cents kilowatt hour. Well, when we sell back power, when we're not using it, previously it was 1, 2, 3 cents. It was cost avoidance stuff. It was pathetic. And that's why ultimately I ended up getting batteries, and I stored the power and I used it myself. And those of you that remember from my presentations 2 years ago, I said basically I became my own utility company because that's the free market working. Oh, you don't want to pay me? I own power. I'll store my own power. I'll use my own power. So as that's starting to happen, they're like, oh, maybe we ought to pay net metering. So they have net metering that's available, and they'll pay you the 10 or the 11 cents. And that's only available now for about 3,500 more solar installations. So for those people that were interested in maybe going solar and getting the federal tax credit that remains, that's something to think about. But Daniel makes a good point, and this has come up before. There are a lot of people who can't afford solar. And so what we got to do is figure out programs, and I postulated this to the concerned black clergy. I said, these churches, mosques, synagogues, these places are institutions that are going to be around for decades. I mean, 100 years. They're 50-year, 100-year institutions at a minimum. So doing a solar system there is a safe bet. And we could figure out and create a fund whereby we're able to create a revolving loan fund. So you do a $100,000 project and you're paying $5,000 a year over 20 years. Over 20 years, you pay for that project. That goes into revolving loan that allows more and more and more and more solar to be done on houses of worship. For example, we could do the same thing for affordable housing. There's lots of creative ways we could roll solar out as it gets cheaper, and increasingly roll out batteries and other efficient mechanisms. As an example of just how crazy this is, the Low Income Assistance Program is like $1.5 million. $1.5 million. The revenues of my company exceed that. And I don't have a big company, So my point here is like, what are we doing? Who are we really helping? Daniel or myself would triple that, would quadruple that, would tenfold increase to that. And we would browbeat our Republican friends to join us until it was a $10 million efficiency program to help those that are not that well off.
Thank you, John and Daniel. I've run out of questions. Dee, do you see any more questions up there? Susan Brewer, she's got her hand up. Go ahead. Unmute yourself first.
Unmuted. Okay, so to Daniel and John, what is a better way to improve broadband? And also in terms of the green, how would the cost of that be underwritten? Because we've talked a lot about how the misspent monies that were used to underwrite the nuclear power plants. If green energy was going to be adopted, what's a plan for spreading those costs out?
Daniel?
Easy question. Why don't you take it, Daniel?
So, let me start on the second part on the broadband question. Can you repeat the first part of that question?
Here someone says, as your next state senator, I will seek funding to bring better broadband. So the question is, if better broadband is needed, how does that happen? What does that look like?
The thing is, we have the technology. I don't mean to keep, playing tennis with John, but he just mentioned it. Like we have everything in our possession right now. AT&T is probably the top telecommunications company in the world, right here in Metro Atlanta. And I know this. I have a partnership with Warner Media. Warner Media is under AT&T and HBO, all these different brands. We have the capacity. What we don't have is innovative leaders and thinkers that are going to step out of that box called 244 Washington Street, which is their office, and go right down the street and have a conversation about doing that and bring in the right legislator to write the bills to do it. Now, for me, I don't want to just see better broadband. What does that mean? What I want to see is kids that are when Obama was in office, I worked with Michelle Obama on the Let's Move campaign. She coined the phrase in many instances, food deserts, because she started going around the country saying, look, what we have in Georgia is not only food deserts, we have information deserts. We have areas where kids have access to broadband, but it's not high-speed internet. I don't want kids, right now we're deploying laptops to kids. Well, if the kid gets a laptop without the internet and without high-speed, reliable internet, it doesn't make sense. So your second point, we need to really rethink the investment, because if I'm not mistaken, you're asking about the transition to a clean energy economy. So for me, what we need to do is really just think about it. For instance, with healthcare, Republicans always say, where's the money going to come from? We always hear, where's the money going to come from? Well, as soon as COVID hit, we found $4 trillion. As soon as these things, we have the money. We can, the national in the United States right now, you can take about $400 million and have a significant impact on energy infrastructure in our country. For years, we've been told we can't do it. For years, they said, for the last couple of years, Green New Deal, there's no way it's going to work. all these things we're saying, we just found $400 million to go to put, $4 trillion. 10% of that, 400 billion would have been more than enough to redo our entire grid. We need to start rethinking our priorities because it's an easy question for us to ask because we know it's needed, but what's not happening is 5 people on commission that are 1, not prioritizing it, 2, it's not in their best interest, and 3, there's a quote that I always share with folks when I'm having these debates, and it says that it's hard for a man to understand a thing when his salary depends on him not understanding. We have too many commissioners that are just sitting in place, and with all due respect to Mr. McDonald, this gentleman has been in office for over 30 years, and I'm sorry, but you've got to start thinking outside of the box and not just keeping a seat on. We need to be more aggressive about those investments. That starts with our small businesses, but it also starts with us encouraging areas like Georgia to be what I like to refer to as the Silicon Valley of the South, but for energy generation and for solar.
Yeah, that's great.
John, I'm going to give you the last word. We close at 6:30, so John, you go ahead, and I'll make a final comment after you speak.
Thank you. So, first off, for those that are interested in my campaign, let me refer you to this to this bit, and I'll tell you why that's important. If you Google Facebook and go to a New Energy Guy, you will see content for 2 months or more now. One of those, and this is a Tuesday town hall we have every Tuesday. Tomorrow, it's on social justice and energy equality. We're having minority representatives speaking. It's the activists that spoke at the Aubrey thing in Brunswick. Ahmed Aubrey's rally there at the Brunswick Courthouse. A lady that's running her state house down there. My point here is that every Tuesday we've got subject matter that we've got. So we've got this big library. We've got one on broadband, and in there you see a map. Georgia is right now completing a state mapping system, the Georgia Development Initiative, and they're going to know where all the different places are that do and don't have service. And to your question, when they say better broadband, what they're talking about are speeds that exceed 25 megabits per second. So 25 and under is considered broadband, but people want higher speeds than that. So that's the baseline that they're talking about. And this mapping initiative will allow us to figure out where the easy and low-hanging fruit is and where the harder stuff is. There's some last mile stuff that could cost a whole lot of money. So if we have limited resources, let's focus to where we can really help. And that mapping system, which is going to be out soon, and it's kind of like, what's taking so long and why are we dealing with this now? I mean, suddenly everybody's woken up to the fact that children can't study at their homes, but they couldn't always study at their homes because of this, frankly, because of the stupid Republicans have been in charge, mouthing about how they care about rural Georgia, and they haven't done anything. And now they're forced to do something. So the other bit is that I think we may get a solution in the next 2 years, Starlink, some other stuff that's more satellite based. Right now it's real expensive, but Tesla and SpaceX are working on this network of satellites that, fingers crossed, it could be the magic bullet, but it's a year or two off. We can't count on that. And so we need to go attack the low-hanging fruit now. The mapping system will help us identify it. And as PSC commissioners, we should be coalescing around that. But if you want to hear more about that and more about lots of content, coal ash, energy rates, solar, blah, 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 blah. And we had Al Gore's daughter on talking about energy equity. If you want to see these, go to my New Energy Guy Facebook page, and you can also follow me at New Energy Guy on Twitter.
Thank you, John.
Thank you all.
So let me close by saying, it is really, really exciting not only to have a Democratic candidate to run for the PSC, but to have two, both of whom are highly intelligent, highly experienced in their area, and enthusiastic and energetic about being in public service. And we have, we're doing great up here in Raven County and the Northern Tier. We've got Steve Daly and Dave Cooper here tonight who are running for the state legislature, and they're great candidates. But here, my only regret is that you're running for the same office, and we can only vote for one of you this year. thank you so much for appearing tonight, both John and Daniel. And we look forward to one of you being our next Public Service Commissioner. Thank you and good night.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Love Raven. Thank you, Daniel. Good to see you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Thank you. Good luck, D. Good luck.
Steve,
Go team.
go- thank you. Go
Thank
Steve.
you. Thank you, guys.
Oh, man. You're a fireball. I love you.
Well, she is that.
See your face, my dear.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson, no comments from you.
Oh,